You guys for inviting me. Should I just step up there and then I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to use. So can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. So I guess I have about 40 minutes. Is that an accurate assessment of the time? Okay. It's not a whole lot of time. So as I forget her name now. Sorry, Yashodhara. Okay. Mentioned. I'm at the University of Texas at Austin at the McCombs School of Business, which is where I'm a faculty of marketing. But this year I'm visiting the Indian School of Business for 1 year. And you know, people ask me, how come a business school professor is teaching a course on happiness, which is what I do both at McCombs and at the Indian School of Business. And there's a long story behind this. I'll give you a very short version of it. In 2007, I led a bunch of MBAs from the McCombs School of Business to India on a trip, a kind of a learning trip. And I got to meet a lot of my colleagues from 15 years back. I graduated from the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, in 1992. And 2007, it was 15 years. Thank you. Many of them had become really successful in life, right? And some of them were CEOs of companies and all that. But I noticed that there was very little correlation between career success and what I might call life success, which is how happy, how meaningful their life seem to be, how fulfilled they seem to be, and so on. So I turned around to my MBA students from the US and asked them, supposing I were to offer a course on what are the determinants of a happy and fulfilling life, would you guys be interested in taking such a class? And most of them said, yes, we would love to take such a class. Now, this was around a bonfire and we were all drinking, so it may not have been representative of their true interest. But it turned out that soon after I went back, I put a syllabus together and I started offering the class. And every year since then, my class has been oversubscribed. I've had a waiting list. It just goes to show that there's a deep hunger for the topic. You know, all of us are at some level or the other, whether we express it in exactly the same way or not, whether we define happiness in exactly the same way or not, we are very interested in this topic of what are the determinants of a happy and fulfilling life, okay? So that was 5 years back that I started teaching this class, and over these 5 years, it's just kind of become more or less a calling for me. I was always personally very interested in the topic. But what happened parallelly is that there's a whole branch of psychology called positive psychology that looks into this topic, and that developed on the side. And so I was able to tap into a lot of that, and I use a lot of that in my courses. Okay. So in case you're interested in this topic, I mean, obviously I teach it over a whole semester, right? And so even to reduce it down to 1.5 hours, which is what normally I get when I speak about it, is actually cutting it down quite a bit. And now I have 40 minutes, which is like half of that. So I'm going to try and touch on the big points, right? I'm not going to be able to get into some of the subtleties and nuances which are very, very important when it comes to happiness, as it turns out. Perhaps some of those will come out in the Q&A session after I finish speaking. Anyway, so if you're really interested in the topic and want to follow more on this, you know, what I'm going to talk about today, I have a website. It's called happysmarts.com. Happy Smarts, I define it as the ability to consistently make happiness-enhancing decisions. Also, there's a Coursera course that I'm going to teach. I'm pretty sure that many of you are aware of Coursera, but if you're not, please Google it and check it out. Not right now, at some other point. Coursera. And it's an online platform for free courses. I'm going to teach a course on happiness beginning the 15th of June this year. It's going to last for 6 weeks. Obviously, I'll be able to get into much more depth out there. And as it turns out, conceptual learning is one thing when it comes to happiness, but actual practice of some of these exercises is critical. Even if you don't know the concepts, if you do the exercises, you're much more likely to be happy. And so in that course, I'm going to have the opportunity to actually conduct these exercises. And so I'd highly encourage you to look into it if you're interested in the topic. Hopefully, at the end of the session, if I have a couple of minutes, I'll show you guys the intro video for this class that we have shot, incidentally, at ISB, most of it. Okay, so let me jump right into it. If you ask most psychologists, what does it take for a person to be happy? Obviously, it's very, very important that your basic necessities are met, right? Your food, clothing, shelter. those necessities are met. But beyond it, particularly for the smart and successful, what does it take to be happy? They'll tell you that 3 things are very, very important, okay? And by the way, I'm going to have mostly pictures on my slides, and hopefully you'll see the connection between what I'm talking about here and the pictures on the slide. The top picture of the, on this slide represents this idea of mastery. Mastery meaning that you feel that you're really good at something. It's okay with me. Either way is okay with me. If you think that I look better moving around, that's fine. Okay. All right. So mastery is a very big goal, which is the idea that you're very, very good at doing something. You know, that's very important for us. A sense of achievement, a sense of effectiveness at doing something, that's very important. The second picture, the one on the bottom left, is a sense of belongingness. That is that you feel part of a community. At the very least, you need at least one really, really intimate relationship, one really, really good friend, with whom you feel that you're not judged, and you can share anything and everything. That's very important. So there's lots of studies done. In one study, they looked at the top 10% happiest people in the world. Every single one of them, thank you, every single one of them had at least one really close relationship. Okay, that's the second thing that's important, a sense of belongingness. And the third thing, represented by the picture at the bottom right, is a sense of autonomy or freedom. That is that you feel that you're the master of your own decisions. Your decisions and your thoughts are not being impinged upon by other people. Mr. Satyarthi also talked about it, children's freedom. Freedom is a very, very important thing for human beings. So mastery, belongingness, autonomy, coincidentally, they kind of represent an MBA, although, you know, it's just a coincidence. It's not really what we teach at MBA schools. Okay, so the big case I'm going to make today is that all of us recognize at some level that these 3 things are important, even if we don't articulate it as such. And what we do is we go about trying to achieve these things in a certain manner. And even the smart and successful do the same thing. They try and achieve these 3 goals in a certain manner, and it turns out that particular approach is actually not conducive for enhancing happiness. Not only that, it's also not conducive for meeting those very goals, okay? So the approach to the left, which is the worse approach or the bad approach, try to represent it pictorially there. Sorry, the approach on the right. I don't know if you can see the words from the back, but so we try and achieve mastery through chasing superiority. That is that we want to be better than everybody else at something. The most wealthy, the most powerful, the most beautiful, and so on. The second, we try and achieve belongingness through desire to be loved, desire to be nurtured, desire to be taken care of, desire for attention. Right? It's a self-centered kind of perspective, approach to having the sense of belongingness fulfilled. And the third, we try and achieve autonomy through control, through controlling other people, through controlling the outcomes. You know, if the weather is really bad, we want it to be air conditioned. If it's too hot, if it's too polluted, we try and change it to be less polluted, and so on. Okay? So those are the standard approaches that even the smart and the successful pursue. And it turns out that those are not perhaps the best approaches if you want to be happy, right? And instead, the approach on the left is actually a better approach. And some of those words out there may not be familiar to you. So I'm going to start with this idea of pursuing flow as a better approach to achieving mastery than is chasing superiority. Some of you might have heard of this term flow. It's a word that this guy on the screen that you see coined back in the 1970s. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. That's how you pronounce that name out there. I don't know if you can see it. But what he did in one of his experiments was he gave about 800 people, and these were people from a variety of backgrounds. You know, some of those people are artists, some business people, some housewives, and so on, a beeper to carry with them. This was experiments done back in the 70s, so they didn't have phones and apps and all that. So they had beepers given to all these 800 people, and these people were also given a little booklet. And he programmed these beepers to go off at random times during the day for a whole week. And whenever the beeper went off, the people had to take out the booklet and write what they were doing and how happy they were when they were doing it. And then after the week was over, he collected all these booklets from all these 800 people, and then he pored over them. And he wanted to find out what were people doing, all these people from a variety of backgrounds, right? Not just in terms of vocations, but in terms of gender, in terms of religious affiliations, in terms of age, and so on, socioeconomic status. And he wanted to find out, is there something common across all these people in what they were doing when they were happy? And it turned out there was. Okay, and he called those activities which are most happiness enhancing flow activities. Okay? And he chose this word, I think, very cleverly because when you think of flow, you think of perhaps a river, right? A river's got a quiet strength about it. It knows where it's going. Even if there are obstacles in front of it, it finds a way to get around it and so on. And that's how you feel when you are engaged in these activities that are happiness enhancing. They are flow-like. You're in control, you know what you're doing, and you can get around obstacles, okay? I'm going to describe 3 features of flow that are very, very critical of, they epitomize flow events a lot. He actually came up with 6 different aspects of flow or features of flow. I only want to mention 3 here because of lack of time. So the first feature, which is the picture represented on the top, has to do with a paradoxical perception of time. That is that when the flow activity is happening, you feel like the time is moving really slowly. But once the event is over, you feel like, wow, how did so much time pass? Okay? So for example, if you're playing tennis, you could almost feel like, if you're in flow, you could almost feel like you're able to see the fur on the ball stand up, right? In cricket, they say that this guy is in form and he's able to see the ball like a football, right? So that's what happens. It feels like you're kind of like in slow motion, right? And you're much more efficient and fluid in your movements. And so you might be actually covering a lot more court, but you're not as exhausted. Okay? It's almost like you're a Neo from the Matrix. If you've watched the movie, you're able to dodge bullets. You feel like that. Second feature of flow, represented by this picture on the left-hand side, lower left, there actually should be a cross on it because there it seems like the lady out there is a little bit self-conscious. When you're experiencing flow, you're actually the opposite of it. You're not self-conscious, meaning that normally when we're not in flow, and perhaps this occurs a lot of time for us, when we're doing something, a part of our brain is occupied in commenting and judging on how we are doing, right? Raj, you're making a great presentation now, you're really screwing up. So there's a judge, there's an inner voice that's constantly commenting. When you're in flow, that inner voice is gone. Okay, and the reason why it's gone is because you'll see on the next slide, I'm going to elaborate on this, that flow events call everything that you have, all your strengths you have, all your learnings you have, all your capacities, and fully engage them. So you don't have any excess capacity left over to judge on how well you're doing. Okay? And the last aspect, which kind of flows from the other two, has to do with a very intense focus on the next sub-goal or the sub-sub-goal. Imagine that you're climbing a rock face and your eventual goal is to reach the summit and have a picnic lunch with a friend who's driving up, right? But if you're in flow, you won't be really thinking about that ultimate goal. You'll be involved in thinking about, okay, what's the next ledge I can hold on to, right? Or is my hand a little bit damp and should I powder it and so on. And so it's really a intense focus on the next moment rather than on the ultimate goal. Although once in a while, you might step back and think about the ultimate goal, but you'd quickly get back into being absorbed or immersed in the next moment. Okay, so it was very impressive that Csikszentmihalyi found all these features for flow, and what I find to be really kind of almost goosebump worthy is that, like I mentioned some time back, people from a variety of backgrounds all around the world have had some level of flow experience at some point in their life or the other. It's a little bit unfortunate if the last flow experience you had was when you were a child, but almost everybody, I can bet, I've been teaching this class for so many years now, has had some indication or experience of flow-like activities. Okay, so what I think is even more impressive with what Csikszentmihalyi did is he identified the conditions under which flow is likely to happen. And what he found is that flow happens when the amount of ability that's required of you by a task is matched by the amount of ability you have for the task. So if you're playing tennis, you're an intermediate player, and you're playing against somebody else who's an intermediate player, that's when you're likely to experience flow, right? And it's not a perfect match of abilities. Actually, the amount of ability required of you needs to be just a little bit higher than the amount of ability you have. Let's say you're a 4.0 level tennis player. If you're playing against somebody who's a 4.1, that's when you're likely to experience flow. Why is that that person has to be a little bit better? Because that's when you can't rely just on your past knowledge in order to beat him. You have to grow and evolve as you're doing it. That's what stretches you. That's what puts into play all your full mental capacity, physical capacity, and leaves no room, no excess capacity left over to comment on how you're doing. Okay? So what happens when you have you're in a situation where the amount of ability required of you is higher than the amount of ability you have? You get into anxiety-provoking kind of situations. The challenge is too much on your plate, you can't handle it, right? When the amount of ability is too high, then you get into boring experiences, right? So let me just quickly talk about one other concept here called low and high flow events. So when your amount of ability is low and your challenge is also low, you get into flow, but that flow is not of a high quality because it's going to be interrupted. So for example, on the tennis court, if you're a beginner, you're playing against a beginner, what will happen is the rallies might be interesting for you because at that level, that's what is challenging for you, but one of you is going to hit into the net far too often, right? Or hit it outside the court far too often. And then picking up the ball is obviously very easy for us to do. Amount of ability that we have to pick up a ball from the net is far greater than the amount of required ability to do it, and so we get bored, right? And so you'll have flow for a little bit, but then get bored again, and then flow for a little bit, bored again. But if you're really high, let's say Djokovic versus Federer, then you can have like uninterrupted 30-ball, 35-ball rallies of flow. And the flow is so great that, in fact, not only the people who are doing it are enjoying it and caught up in the moment, even the other people are drawn into it. Even the audience is drawn into their flow, okay? All right, so let me quickly talk about why flow boosts happiness. The first reason is because of mastery. That what has been discovered is that the true determinant of mastery in any domain, if you look at any person who's acknowledged as a master, be it in music or business or art, they have experienced, it's been found, at least 10,000 hours of flow-like experiences in that domain, right? So if you take a look at A.R. Rahman, or you take a look at Fela Kuti, who's a musician from Ghana, Nigeria, you look at Britney Spears for that matter, right? I mean, anybody, or you look at Narayan Murthy or Bill Gates, whoever, right? I'm sure there's many people in this crowd as well, or Satyarthi, right? If they're master of what they do, they've spent 10,000 hours at least doing that activity. 10,000 hours, by the way, translates roughly into 10 years. So you need to spend about 10 years. Even Mozart, Csikszentmihalyi discovered, produced his best work only when he was about, I say only, around 17, because he started composing when he was 3, right? He had to spend those 10 years and 10,000 hours in order to become a master. So that's one big reason why it boosts happiness. Second big reason it boosts happiness is because of enjoyment. You enjoy the moment when you're experiencing flow, which is what Csikszentmihalyi found in his original research. And the last reason, which is very important, is that when people experience flow and exhibit flow, other people find that person to be attractive. Other people find that person to be worthy of pursuing and showering attention and love on, right? Really great example of this is Susan Boyle. If you've seen her perform on Britain's Got Talent about 5 years back in 2009, she's not a great-looking person, right? She's 48 years old when she performed. And in my classes, sometimes people don't know, right, who she is. And so I asked them to rate her on attractiveness, and they gave her a 3.5 out of 10, right? And then I play that video clip where she's performing, and then ask them to rate after she's performed, and they give her a 6.5 out of 10, right? So I actually interviewed Csikszentmihalyi for my Coursera course, and I asked him, why is this, that people don't grudge it as much if another person experiences flow in their own domain? And he told me that the big reason is because when you think about flow, flow is not a scarce resource, right? It's not a finite resource. Your flow doesn't have to come at my cost to my flow. In fact, oftentimes our flows go together because if I'm having flow while playing tennis with you, then you're also probably having flow with me, right? Whereas if you think about extrinsic yardsticks or extrinsic rewards or wealth, for example, or power, fame, etc., there's only so much wealth to go around. Only so many houses to go around that one can buy, or so many covers of popular magazines on which your mugshot or my mugshot can appear. And so all those extrinsic yardsticks are scarce, and therefore if you get more of it, then I feel threatened, and therefore I hold a grudge. Whereas with flow, because it's an infinite resource according to him, people actually like it when other people exhibit flow. Okay? So even though flow is the true determinant of mastery, it turns out that many of us are guilty of chasing mastery through superiority, okay? And it is a good motivator. It turns out that when you feel jealous or envious of somebody else, it really lights a fire under your backside and you want to work hard. But what happens is, in reality, I'm going to touch on it in the next slide, is that actually far from making you a master, what it does is it erodes your chance of becoming a master. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you guys a video of many of these pictures actually translate into videos of this guy whose picture I showed you in the last slide, a master at something called speed painting, okay, which is really painting at a very, very high speed. And you'll see how he's a master at this.
Our next contestant hails from Columbus, Georgia. Let's hear it for Dee Westry. Come on out, Dee. All right, so what is your talent? What will you be performing today?
I'm a speed painter, and I'm going to do a painting in a minute and a half or less.
So the guy's amazingly talented. He's painted Anderson Cooper in 90 seconds flat in front of an audience in 1.5 minutes, right? And he's obviously a showman. And that's the interesting thing about flow, is that you grow in ways that are unique and new and personality based, right? You don't necessarily only become better at that particular craft, you become better at peripheral concentric circles of talents. Okay, so by the way, this guy out here on the lower left, again, I mean, that's a video of a guy who's called the world's best pickpocket. You know, he's very, very good at picking people's pockets, and he's got a TED Talk, which is what that link is to. I'll send these slides over if you guys are interested in any of these videos, okay? So let me just quickly talk about why seeking superiority lowers happiness levels. There's many reasons. I want to touch on 3 here. One is adaptation, right? So when you're seeking superiority over another person, be it in painting or drumming or teaching or whatever, what happens is that you really can't compare yourself on the dimension of interest to you with the other person that easily, right? If you think about who's the best drummer in the world, there'll be tons of opinions from around the world. Of course, you have to be at a certain level, but beyond it, it's very difficult to say if Stuart Copeland is better than Neil Peart or, our own, what's his name, Shivmani, sorry, yeah, I should know. I'm from Tamil Nadu. Anyway, so it's very, very difficult. Is it speed of drumming? Is it the feel that you have when you're drumming, the groove? Or is it like the genres that you can cover through your drumming, etc.? And if you expand the definition of drumming to include like djembe and mridangam, then it becomes very, very tough. So what happens is invariably we start comparing with other people on extrinsic dimensions. Okay, you're a better drummer if you can attract more people to your concerts, or if you get more money for creating an album, right? Or if you have more Facebook friends. And that then leads you to adaptation, right? You can't ever be the same level of happiness that you derive from the last boost you got of wealth or fame or power and stay at that same level of happiness. You need another boost soon, right? And so you keep adapting, and which is a big reason why it's not a big driver of happiness, lowers happiness. And second reason is because even if you manage to be the richest or the best, acknowledged as the best, it won't last long, right? And while you're there, you're going to be constantly anxious and insecure about how long this is going to last. I remember this interview with Roger Federer in 2008 when he was #1 for like 3 years, and he was saying that I actually feel more insecure being #1 because I'm constantly worried about when is it that somebody else is going to topple me over than when I was not #1. A third reason is that birds of a feather flock together. In other words, that if you're really one of those guys who chases superiority, you're going to be surrounded by other people who are of a similar nature. And it turns out that the company of those kinds of people is terrible, right? As all of us can vouch. They constantly name drop and talking about their own accomplishments and so on, which is really irritating and happiness lowering. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this, but basically a lot of studies have shown that chasing superiority, although it can motivate you to start a task for a bunch of very good reasons, it actually kills the ability to actually master a domain. What you need for mastery is flow, not need for superiority, okay? So let me just move on to the second one, which is belongingness. And belongingness is so important that I'll just give you a couple of quick examples of this, is that being in love is cherished worldwide as the most pleasant or positive experience ever, right? Which is why it's such a big popular theme in movies and books and so on. The opposite of being in love in many ways is like being not even having an opportunity to connect with another person, solitary confinement in a prison. Anybody who's ever been through it vouches that that's the worst thing that you could ever have. It's worse than even physical torture. Here's one kind of manifestation of our need to belong to other people. By the way, human beings are probably the most social species there is. And one way in which we try and attempt to connect with other people is by mimicking them, right? If we mimic other people, we think that they'll think that we're similar to them, and therefore they'll want to bond with us, okay? And sometimes we do this in relatively unconscious ways and sometimes really funny ways. I want to show you a quick video of a guy trying to mimic others inside an elevator.
The gentleman in the elevator now. The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star.
I don't know why this. Okay, here it is.
The man
Okay.
with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more. to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before.
Right, so we're very highly social, and so this sense of belongingness is very important to us. But what happens is many of us try and chase it in a way that is too needy, what is called anxious attachment style in the literature. And it's encouraged a lot in the movies too, that, you know, this idea that you're not complete unless you have your soulmate. And so we become very desperate for relationships. And it turns out being needy for a variety of reasons is not conducive for enhancing your happiness. One is that other people don't find you attractive if you're needy. In leadership context, studies have shown that leaders who are distant, emotionally distant, aren't actually the ones that people like, okay? Even though there is a notion that the strong silent type might be a good leader, it turns out that the people who are actually vulnerable, are willing to kind of reveal some of their insecurities, are the ones that actually get more traction and persuasive skills. Also, the story that these people tell themselves if they're avoidant or they want to go it alone is a story of I'm alone, I don't have any real bridges to other people. That's not a very good story for happiness. So the ideal place you want to be is what's called secure attachment style, which is that you're not afraid of being in a relationship and seeking intimacy and being intimate, but at the same time, you're not desperate for it, right? So it's a kind of like a inverse U, if you will, shape, where too much neediness is not good, too much avoidance is not good, somewhere in between is the ideal point. And the approach that we take, either to be avoidant or needy, there's an alternative to it, which is the need to love and need to give, which of course a lot of people have emphasized, including of course Mr. Satyarthi, but also Munjal, right? Mr. Munjal. And what research has shown, and this is very, very interesting new emerging research, which is showing that people have a very strong desire to be generous and kind, and when they are given the opportunity to do it, they actually experience a greater level of happiness than they expected. In one of the studies, what they did is they asked students who were going to their classes at the University of British Columbia, they accosted them while they were on their path and gave them $5 and told them either to spend it on themselves or on somebody else. Then later that evening, they called all these participants and asked them, so did you spend it on yourself or on somebody else? And how happy are you right now, right? And it turned out the people who spent it on other people were happier than those who spent it on themselves. Even though a separate group of people were asked, well, we're going to do this experiment. Who do you predict is going to be happier? That group, 63% of them said that the people who spend it on themselves are going to be happier. So it seems like we have the belief or the intuition that, if we earn money, keeping it to ourselves will probably make us happy, which explains why many of us aren't that philanthropic or altruistic with our money. But it turns out that spending it on other people actually enhances our happiness, okay? There's lots of evidence of this, not just this study. There's another study which was done across 136 countries where they looked at the relationship between people who donate to charity on a regular basis and their happiness levels, and it turns out there's a very high positive correlation between the two. People who donate to money are the same level of happiness as those who earn double their salaries, right? So donating to money can have a big effect. The need to nurture and love is so high in human beings that even seeing two other people being kind and nice to each other makes us feel this emotion of love, right? Which is why chick flicks and movies which have that human element are so popular. I want to play you guys a very quick video ad, which is one of my favorites. I'm sure that many of you have seen it, but if you have, you wouldn't mind seeing it again, I'm pretty sure. So it's an ad for Google.
ये मैं ये यूसुफ लंगोटिया यार सी मेरा लाहौर में हमारे घर के सामने एक बड़ा बाग था। उस बाग का गेट बाबा आदम के ज़माने। रोज शाम को हमने वहाँ पतंगे उड़ानी और उसके बाद जाके यूसुफ के दुकान से जजरिया चुरा के खानी।
जजरिया?
मेरा साहब नमस्ते। नमस्ते। मेरी पोती मुंबई वाली।
नमस्ते।
बचपन की दादाजान, दिल्ली से किसी की कॉल है।
हेलो,
यूसुफ अंकल?
कौन?
जी मैं सुमन बोल रही हूँ दिल्ली से, आपके बचपन के दोस्त बलदेव जी की पोती। याद है बचपन में आप दोनों झंझरिया चुरा के खाते थे?
बचपन की तंग गली फिर से कूद फांदे, छोटी छोटी मीठी चोरी गांठ लेके बांधे। एक पतंग सा उड़ता था परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह, परिंदों की तरह। एक दौर था मन मन मोर था, एक दौर था मन मन मोर था।
पार्टीशन के वक्त हम रातों रात हिंदुस्तान आ गए।
दादू?
यूसुफ जी बड़ी आजादी।
कागजों की कश्तियों में डूबा रहता था, झांकती खिड़कियों में उलझा रहता था। वो भी क्या दौर था, मन पे न जोर था। एक दौर था मन मन मोर था, एक दौर था मन मन मोर था।
भैया थोड़ा जल्दी।
हाँ जी, कौन? हैप्पी बर्थडे यारा। यूसुफ, यूसुफ, वो यूसुफ, मेरे बल्लू, यूसुफ है यार।
Okay, so if you have such a deep desire to see generosity, acts of generosity, and if you derive so much happiness from being generous, why don't we try it to forge relationships with other people, right? When you do acts of generosity, it turns out that other people like you better, unsurprisingly, and so they have a tendency to reciprocate, which can then forge this virtuous cycle that ends up in creating lots of connections with other people. So that's what I would recommend, and a lot of, based on the happiness research, as a much more viable means of addressing this goal for belongingness. The last goal, which is autonomy, and most of us try and seek it through control. Now, being in control is very, very important for happiness, right? And there's one study which was done with the mice in the 1970s where they gave mice cocaine, right? I mean, I'm talking about the drug here. They gave it cocaine, and they gave these mice cocaine at random times during the day. The mice had no control over when it got cocaine, right? And another set of mice, they also gave that mice cocaine, but they gave the mice the ability and the opportunity to take cocaine whenever it wanted, right? So it had control over when it kind of drugged itself. And it turned out that the second set of mice lived twice as long as the first set, right? Even if something is bad for you, having control over it actually extends your life more than not having control over it. Another study which was done with retired people, they gave one set of people the opportunity or the control over what set of movies they watched, what set of plants they had in the room, etc. Another set, they dictated these things to those people, and those second set of people ended up, who did not have control over their decisions, ended up living 3 years less than the first set of people. What happens is that most of us recognize we need this control, and we start controlling other people and the environment too much. I won't kind of get into each of these pictures, but basically most of you would probably be aware, particularly if you're married and if you have kids, that there's a desire to control others, right? Or you might have experienced being controlled by others. And it turns out that when you try and control other people, there's many reasons why it doesn't enhance your happiness. First of all, people can't be controlled, right? And particularly outcomes can't be controlled, and they're like Donald Trump's hair, right? Very, very difficult to control. And so the more you try to control it, the less you're going to actually be able to manage it, which is going to make your life miserable. Second is that just as we have a desire for control, other people have a desire for autonomy. So when you try to control them, they kind of revolt against it by exhibiting their displeasure, maybe in passive-aggressive ways or in aggressive-aggressive ways. And so you can either have other people's love or you can have control over them. You can't have both. That's another reason why it erodes happiness. And the third reason has to do with the kinds of decisions you make. You surround yourself with people who are willing to be controlled if you're a control freak, and those set of people don't enhance your decision-making quality. It turns out that for you to make good decisions as a leader, you need to be surrounded by diversity of views, okay? So the antidote to it is to take what's called internal control, which is control over your own mind, over your own emotions. And so, you know, somebody who's taken personal responsibility for their happiness might be wearing a t-shirt which says, no matter what the weather outside, the weather in my head is always sunny, right? And we have the ability to do this because our emotions are a function of our thoughts, and we have control over our thoughts, or we could have control over our thoughts. Many of us don't, because they're automatic and they're conditioned by previous experiences and so on. But the whole idea of meditation, for example, or mindfulness, is to step outside that conditioned response and to try and become separate from what's going on at the level of the mind and the body. And through that ability, or through that practice, you gain the ability to control your thoughts and your feelings. And once you do that, then you recognize how much of a happiness killer this need for control is. And you're able to then become much more mature in when and how and with whom you seek this control. And you are in control of when you want to seek control rather than that tendency being in control of you. Okay? So there's many reasons why internal control enhances happiness. One is mastery. You're a master of yourself. I've talked about mastery being a very important goal. So self-mastery makes you happy. You retain the keys to your own happiness in your own hands rather than abdicating it to the external environment. And finally, you have something called cognitive flexibility. When you're in control of your emotions, then you're able to choose how you want to react to something. You don't shoot out an angry email in response to an angry email, right? You don't kind of get caught up in an emotional turmoil in an office meeting. You can select how you want to respond, and that makes you very mature and well-liked by other people, which enhances your happiness, okay? So to summarize, three very, very important things for happiness are, you know, being passionate about your work, and choosing that route to mastery rather than the route of chasing superiority, having a sense of friendship, and being kind and generous to other people, just experimenting with it a little bit to begin with, to see if it's in fact a much better route to happiness than is seeking attention and love. And third is self-mastery as opposed to trying to control the external world, okay? Do I have a couple of minutes to play a quick video of my Coursera course or no? Yeah, okay, all right. Hello, hola, ni hao, namaste, and aloha. My name is Raghunathan. I'm a visiting professor at the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad, India, and I welcome you to a life of happiness and fulfillment. People from around the world differ from each other in a variety of ways, in terms of their looks, in terms of their interests, and in terms of their behaviors. But we're all united in one very important way. Can you guess what that way might be? To help you with the answer, I'm going to play you a song.
Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy.
We are all united in wanting to be happy. Everybody agrees about this, from scientists and philosophers to writers and spiritualists. But even though we all want to be happy, we didn't have a good idea of what it takes to be happy. But all that has changed now. In the last 15 years or so, scientists have gotten into the act big time. And we now have a very good idea of what it takes to lead a happy and fulfilling life. By taking this course, you'll get to know the answers to questions such as, why aren't the smart and successful as happy as they could or should be? What are the 7 deadly happiness sins? And what are the corresponding habits that enhance happiness levels? And finally, what are some of the major obstacles that make it difficult for us to overcome these sins and implement these habits? By taking this class, not only will you get to learn about the true and the fake determinants of happiness, you'll also be able to come up with an action plan, a scientifically validated action plan for leading a life of happiness and fulfillment. So I hope that you will join me and thousands of others from around the world to take this class on a life of happiness and fulfillment. This is the dance club of Indian School of Business. Thank you, guys. I don't know if we have time for Q&A.
We don't have too much of time, but you're Dr. Happy Smart, so we might as well have a couple of questions happening. Any questions, any comments from the house? Yes, sir. Ma'am. Soft, is that you? Yes, ma'am. Sorry, say that again. How much of success is needed to be happy?
Yeah, so look, I think at some level you need to feel that you're progressing towards mastery, you know, and that's very, very important for you to be happy. And many of us look at how successful we are as an indication to give us the answer. Okay, if I'm really successful, it must mean that I'm a master at something. Everybody acknowledges it, right? But you can have a sense that you're progressing towards mastery even if you're not successful in a conventional sense. That is, you're not the richest or most famous or whatever. One way to do that is through internal control, right? So you feel that you're a master of yourself, what's called personal mastery, which can give you that sense of happiness. And I would recommend that route to feeling or defining success as a personal mastery, as opposed to success in a conventional sense of being rich, famous, powerful, etc. Because for a variety of reasons that I talked about earlier, you're not going to be able to sustain your happiness levels if you tether it to those external yardsticks of success. Does it answer your question? Okay.
Yes, just two more questions. For people who haven't asked questions since morning, so I'll have this gentleman, please introduce yourself, and that person in the last row. Yeah.
Do you want to give them a mic so that everybody can hear?
Do let us know from where you are.
Good afternoon, I'm Soni Virdi, I'm from Gangtok, Sikkim chapter. Ras, thank you very much. Sikkim is a very beautiful state, mountainous region. We have Kanchenjunga. We see snow-clad mountain every day. Your session is so beautiful because people are every day pressurized with one or the other thing. The happiness is most wanted thing in one's life. I wish this session would have been a little longer. You see, it was just like, you know, yesterday we were coming to Delhi. While we cross Bihar, we can see the mountain, you know, white snow-clad mountains. Both of us were together, and then my friend showed me, look at those mountains. Your session was like those mountains only, you know. Beautiful, but it was very far.
Big round of applause, people.
Thank you, thank you. And I wish to talk to you maybe, you know, in future context we can. You know.
Thanks, Soni. Thank you. Yes, sir, in the last table.
Yeah, hi Raj. Thank you. Thanks for making us a little more happier. So,
don't tell me you were depressed since morning.
We have been trying to focus too much, so now it's time to relax. So
name and chapter, please.
We last month in February. Are you not trying to quantify here? Objective-wise, subjective? Like in other terms, are you actually not trying to impose or say or define what happiness means?
So, if I understood you correctly, are you asking me what does happiness mean?
No.
How do you quantify? Okay, I'll give you a very, very quick answer, okay? At the start of the session, Navita was talking about what is happiness to you. And if you notice, she was talking a lot about the means to happiness, not happiness itself. She was talking about, you know, is happiness to you success? Is happiness to you having wild sex in the afternoon? Was it? Okay. Yeah, so those are means to what you like, what you think of as a desirable state. The state of happiness itself is an emotion, right? First of all, everybody would agree that it's a positive emotion. Secondly, within that, there is a variety of things you can choose from. Barbara Fredrickson from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has identified 10 different positive emotions that people could associate with happiness, starting with joy, love, hope, awe, and so on. It goes down the list. Now, you have to ask yourself, what kind of state do you want to experience? And that is, in fact, one of the first things that I start out with in my course. And that can shape all your decisions. So if you associate happiness with what many people call hubristic pride, researchers call hubristic pride, which is a sense of positivity you derive from being superior to other people, that kind of happiness is not going to last long. It's not a very good idea, not a smart thing to do, to tether your happiness to, or to equate it to that kind of a feeling. If you equate it to love, which is the positive feeling you get from feeling a certain connectivity with others, it's a better state. Okay, it can last much longer, particularly if you try hard to be nice to them, right? But perhaps the best way to equate it is with a sense of abundance. That is, that the feeling that I have everything I need and life is perfect with its imperfections. Once you adopt that as your definition of happiness, then what it does is it forces you to try and be as happy as you can given everything you have, rather than trying to demand more out of life. And once you're able to do that, then you can basically be happy no matter what the circumstance eventually. Okay, that's the aim. Okay, so that's how I would equate it. Now, with quantifying versus all that, there's a whole literature on measuring happiness, and it turns out that the simplest way to measure happiness, which is to ask people how happy are you on a 10-point scale, is highly correlated with how happy other people think you are. Is highly correlated with your brain scan images of certain centers lighting up that we know light up when you're happy. Highly correlated with your dopamine levels and serotonin levels in your bloodstream. It's highly correlated with the kinds of actions that you have. Happy people are associated with being more optimistic, with being more generous, with being more creative, and all that happens. So the simplest measure of happiness, which is how happy you are, turns out to be adequate and reliable. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yeah. No, we will have to close the session. We have speakers for the next session who've already arrived. Thank you so much, Raj. A big round of applause for him.